Have you been out to Mr. Flesh Pit National Park yet? No? Well, what are you waiting for? The thunderground awaits! Howdy, folks. You can call me Caver Coop, and I'm here to tell you all about all the wonderful things you can find at Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. It's got fun for the whole family. Don't worry, if you're a timid splunker, we've got plenty to do on the surface. Beautiful hiking trails bathed in that beautiful Texas sun, plenty of fishing, camping, and of course, the breathtaking view of the Flesh Pit's entry orifice. Believe me when I say it will change your perception of existence itself. For those cowboy enough to adventure to the lower visitor center within the Mystery Flesh Pit, a whole new world awaits. From hiking in the southern bronchial forest to the Gentle Farms Petting Zoo, there is plenty to explore. And for the parents, you might consider a full immersion dip in the Amniotic Ballast Spa, where you might glimpse the face of God awakening your mind to cosmic horrors you can now suddenly comprehend. Or you might just find yourself with the desire to make sweet love to your partner. If you're lucky, you might even run into some of the strange and wonderful wildlife that call the pit its home. Most of the wildlife in the pit are completely docile and willing for any photo opportunities. But make sure to keep your distance. You can look, but touching might provoke an incident. And we wouldn't want that, would we? So come on down to Mr. Flesh Pit National Park and discover your insignificance in the flesh of a sleeping god.
Seek shelter immediately. Do not touch gastric ejecta. Do not interact with native PBSO parasitic wildlife. Do not acknowledge the voice. Do not seek the healing waters. Do not engage occultist. Do not abandon hope.
Hi folks, you can call me Norman. Welcome in and put up your feet because today we are exploring the satirical cosmic horror of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. Now, I'm not a geobiologist, nor am I a wildlife expert like Steve Irwin or Coyote Peterson, but I do have the source material as well as the RPG. And I explored a cave in Appalachia at the early age of 6, where I discovered my own fears and phobias of God's creation that still haunt me to this day. The TLDR of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park is that it's this weird fleshy pit found in the 70s that eventually becomes a national park with its own lore, characters, and events that creates this satirical cosmic body horror setting. But Mystery Flesh Pit all began with a rotting grapefruit. Apparently, while on lunch break, Trevor Roberts, the creator of Mystery Flesh Pit, was observing a rotting grapefruit. And as you do on lunch break, you let your imagination run wild a bit. And apparently, the grapefruit reminded him of a crater. Then a horrible, creepy idea began to crop up in his head, something I can wholly relate to. That idea. What if the Grand Canyon was this weird, fleshy, gross crater? And after a little bit of work in Photoshop and a picture of a grapefruit, we've got the genesis of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. Eventually, Roberts would post his work to r/world building. It's just a subreddit for world building. But everybody on r/world building seemed to agree that Mystery Flesh Pit's lore and setting was enthralling. And that eventually led to Mystery Flesh Pit's own Tumblr page or website, the RPG, and there's even a slew of indie games that's made around the lore and setting, as well as a book that should be coming out from Roberts sometime in the future. In this video, we will be exploring the lore of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, from the information we have access to on the Tumblr page, as well as new information that comes from the tabletop RPG. And I would also like to put a few of my own theories regarding like the flesh pit, like what it is, where it came from, that sort of things. But we will get to that after we kind of go through the lore. But now, with all of that out of the way, let's pull up our bootstraps and dive into the lore of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. Starting from the initial exploration by one of the really the only character in the lore. the enigmatic cowboy of charisma, Jim Jackson. You know more than most how I may be prone to hyperbole on occasion, but those Whitman boys that called on Monday are on to something amazing. I mean, really, truly amazing. This isn't any mineral deposit, Colton. At least not like anything I've seen. Went ahead and sent you some samples for you and Chris to start looking at. I didn't think you would all believe me if I didn't. This thing that those old boys found is some kind of organic deposit. It must go down at least 500 or 600 feet by my reckoning. Not a fungus either. This thing breathes and makes sound same as any other creature, and it bleeds. God, how it bleeds, Colton. It's a mess out here. John and some of the others think it might be something from outer space. Most of the hombres we brought out to start excavation call it Diablo de Bajo and are real wary of going too close to what we figure must be the mouth of this thing. Right now, I don't think I care what it is or where it came from. I'm an old man, and I think we're on to something real big out here. Once you and Chris start looking at these samples, go ahead and give Lenny a call to send out his crew and make sure they bring at least 4 excavators. Pay them whatever they ask to make it fast. Also, there's a card here for a fella in Carlsbad with some pretty heavy-duty spelunking gear. Pay him whatever he wants to get here by Friday or Saturday. I'll call Beverly to have her put our other jobs on hold for the next 3 weeks, but you should remind her anyway. We need to move real fast on this. Dale Whitmer already left this morning to find someone in gumption to take some photos. It'll be a circus once that happens. God help us if the feds come and lock it down. There's something about this thing that's important. I don't want to see something this special get in the hands of some damn game warden. Regards, James Jackson. This is our first correspondence from James Jackson regarding the discovery of the flesh pit. Before the exploration, the national park, and before Anodyne and the eventual exploitation of the PBSO. Also, PBSO stands for Permian Basin Superorganism. It's the name given to the creature that makes up the flesh pit. And I will pretty much be using this acronym for the rest of the video. But there's just a ton of character in this letter, just from the writing to the presentation, that I just love. That line, this thing breathes and makes sound same as any other creature, and it bleeds, God, how it bleeds. That's so metal. This document looks like it was just sitting on the back of a tailgate in the Texas desert, getting dirty and grungy and torn, and looks like a whole cup of coffee was spilled on it after Colton read it and, was freaking out about the discovery. Things are really starting to take off down here. At around 3 or so last night, we broke a new depth record of 1,800 feet vertical descent from the maw. It's a damn shame you and other folks are so spooked by this pit. Be down there in it really is something else. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying it's easy. God almighty, is it tough going getting around down in its gullet and such. Man's gotta have an iron constitution or a mighty thick skull. Lucky me that the good Lord has seen fit to bless me with both. Some of the boys here have rigged up scuba gear, and we've been able to squeeze around down there with some effort. Giant muscles, giant bones, innards so big you could drive a trailer truck through. Strange critters scuttle around in the dark down there too. Big bugs and germs and worms and other queer things that you wouldn't believe. Some kind of crab thing the size of a coyote crept out a week and a half ago, and we caught it crawling around the feed trailers. I got a good look at it before one of Dale's boys shot at it and it skittered away. We had the funeral for the third roustabout to pass away this month on Tuesday. The papers are already talking gossip more than I like, and I'm hopeful that Bill and the other attorneys can keep the vultures and feds at bay. People don't understand until they've seen it and been down inside it, Colton. We're pioneers and explorers here. This is good work. This is God's work. Nobody knows what this mystery pit is, or what it eats, or how long it's been here. We need some guys with real smarts, not old men. Doctors, scientists, good decent folk who would have nothing to do with us. Mighty glad that you've taken responsibility for holding down the fort back home while I'm out here playing the cowboy. You're a good man, Colton. Kind of quality individual they don't make anymore. Maybe I'm hoping I can find some of that goodness myself someday. Maybe down in the belly of this beast. Give Samantha and the baby my regards. Jim Jackson. P.S. There's a company out of Fort Worth that I've called up to help with the exploration. I attached their card to this letter. Give their geologists a call and let them know the details. I'm told they're very good at what they do. On the surface level, a giant fleshy pit in Texas is horrifying, but here we have this self-made pioneer jumping into this thing, blazing trails fueled solely by curiosity, cigarettes, and a prayer. He really seems to exemplify that charismatic explorer archetype that we love in stories. And at this time in the 70s, when this letter was written, humankind had really already branched out into all areas of exploration possible. I mean, there aren't any new bodies of land really left to discover, and we were already searching the seas because submarine technology had come a long way, and the Apollo missions had already landed a man on the moon. But this flesh pit is something totally different. A new mysterious horizon to explore and eventually exploit. We also see where Anodyne, the mining company tied into the Flesh Pit's lore, is brought in, but we will get to him later. We also get a glimpse of some of the wildlife that inhabit the pit, and that just becomes more awful and terrifying as we go on. And some of the early tragedies, but we're not really given a whole lot of details on these early deaths. Being an explorer on the edge of the unknown is extremely dangerous. Early explorers to the New World had to survive the journey across the ocean, and starvation, and scurvy, and smallpox, disease, all that sort of stuff. Submariners and divers face crushing pressure and total darkness, and astronauts is, the vacuum of space and unfiltered radiation. The risks are high, but they were overcame anyways. To Jim Jackson, this was no different. It's like he felt it was his sole responsibility to blaze these early trails. It gave him purpose. But on the surface, Jim Jackson wants you to see that self-made cowboy, oil man on the frontier of this fleshy cosmic abyss. But his beginnings are actually quite surprising. Jim is just portraying a character, the charismatic cowboy, somebody you would believe grew up on the ranches of Texas or performing hard labor in the oil fields. But he was actually born in Boston to a mother who came from old money and a father who actually worked on the Manhattan Project. His childhood story really seems to boil down to a bright kid and from a well-to-do family who just, school didn't really sit right with him, and he was just looking to go on an adventure. In his teenage years, he even tried to join the army during the Vietnam War, but because of his father's military connections, he was blocked from joining. It took running away from home to the oil fields for Jim to really feel like he was alive. And through sheer willpower and luck, he was able to earn the moniker Guru of the Underground. The Whitmer job over the PBSO was just another one of those jobs that just led to something totally different. Now we're about to get into the part of Mystery Flesh Pit where the public starts to kind of come into the PBSO. But Jim Jackson as a character I think is really cool. I don't think as a whole the setting really needs a whole lot of characters because the setting itself really pulls a lot of the weight. But getting perceptions from the early explorers is awesome. I love it. It just lets us feel the emotions of discovering a new frontier through someone else's eyes and get that sense of danger and discovery, and it just kind of fleshes out the lore. I think it's really nice as they start to really delve into the pit. Jim Jackson isn't quite done, but it's time to really move on and get into what I would call the roadside attraction era of Mystery Flesh Pit as the real horrors of the park begin to manifest. In 1975, Jim Jackson begins to bring journalists into the pit to relay their efforts to the world by giving them guided tours in their most well-established trails, taking them to some of the early landmarks such as Thor's Ribcage and the Pleasure Domes. Also, if you think Pleasure Dome sounds like a wing of the Playboy Mansion, well, you're not too far off, minus the cosmic horror that goes along with it. Yeah, we'll get to it. Naturally, bringing anyone into the PBSO, you're going to get a lot of different reactions. You're going to have people that are scared to death, they're going to get swallowed whole, or you're going to have people that are probably fueled by the same curiosity as Jim Jackson. And you're also probably going to get a lot of like scientists and biologists searching for new frontiers in their fields of study. And animal rights activists. Miss Frost, please excuse my remarks, but I am more than surprised after finding out about your interview with the Austin Sun. After you accused me of just about every kind of violation of nature possible, my crew and I graciously went out of our way to give you and your friends a personal tour of every aspect of our operation down in Gumption. I believe if you would have asked anyone present during that tour, they would have been more than inclined to believe that things were capital A all right, even amicable. So imagine my shock when today I read that myself and the hard-working folks at Anodyne are a cohort of, quote, blunt and thoroughly thoughtless rabble engaged in the systematic torture and rape of the greatest natural discovery in a generation. Now, I get that you and I see the world differently, and that's okay, but to say those kind of things is an outright lie. As I told you during our first meeting, we're doing the best we can to minimize our impact on this creature, but we also have to protect ourselves and the scientists who go down to study it. Even you yourself were a little shaky being down there with the passages reinforced. Just to show you that my head isn't as dense as you make it out to be in your interview, I asked the Anodyne folks about why they weren't handing over the pit to some university or government research outfit, and they said they're just doing a routine exploration of minerals. I know that hearing that will make you red in the face, but they wanted me to assure you and the general public that those explorations are mostly a formality to justify their research costs to the corporate bean counters, and that they don't really expect to find anything down there behind some wholesome natural science. And despite what you said in your paper, they wanted me to make sure you understand that they only want what is best for the organism, because they try and make some sense of it. And to suggest that they plan to allow visitors to go down into it and even commercialize the pit is almost as ridiculous as your claim that I am a cowboy who is just in this for the money. Regards, James Jackson. P.S. I'll be in Austin for a few days next month. Maybe you could apologize to me in person over dinner? So even a giant monster encased in the desert of Texas that changes history, denies known biology and physics, and brings up existential questions about our place in the universe, there's got to be an animal rights activist to champion its rights. Would you eat an eldritch abomination? I have feelings too. Now, I'm an advocate for conservation efforts and preserving nature, but honestly, that would be the last thing on my mind if something like this existed. If I'm being honest, I would probably be the first person asking, can we kill it? Which, spoiler, no, you can't. The DOA already looked into it, and we have this photocopy of a cover of a study titled Report on the Ineffective Potential of Nuclear Deterrence as a Defense Against the Permian Basin Superorganism. Apparently a sleeping eldritch monster cares not for your nuclear technology. Honestly, I think it'd probably just end up being the world's loudest alarm clock. Anyways, what's really kind of funny though is Miss Frost really hit the nail on the head. We can infer that she was worried about the pit becoming a tourist trap and that they would destroy parts of it and that they would begin to commercialize aspects of the pit for profit. Well, a year later, it becomes a roadside attraction and where, people are allowed to come down inside the pit and hike. And well, Anodyne does eventually find materials that makes it a market leader in just about every major field, from construction and medicine to stuff like personal computers. Eventually, it becomes one of the most powerful global corporations in the world. So her fears became realized, but she was wrong about one thing. Jim Jackson wasn't solely in it for the money. It's likely that Jim probably thought of Anodyne as necessary to fund this adventure, this history-making journey into the flesh pit. But like the elves and dwarves of Middle Earth, he too was deceived. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but just a year later in 1976, Jim Jackson would open up the pit to the public, branding it the Mystery Flesh Pit. The early attraction days of the 70s had a Western theme and included attractions around the pit like a museum, gift shops, restaurants, and a bathhouse. I really like this little map. It really sells those 70s vibes and aesthetics with like the fonts and everything with this weird cowboy fusion. That's definitely a vibe. They also begin to sell trinkets as well as like creams and lotions made using materials from the flesh pit, as well as opening a spa using amniotic ballast, an oily liquid from the pleasure domes that has a red room that's reservation only. We'll talk about amniotic ballast more later, but whatever you're imagining right now is probably pretty close to what it is, okay? They also begin to host special events and host these publicity stunts. One such publicity stunt would involve 50 high-wire performers suspended over the flesh pit, something like you would see at Cirque du Soleil or something like that. I hope you can kind of see where this is going. Something went wrong, and they fell into the pit, which on its own would be a tragedy seeing that many people fall to their deaths. But it's much worse than that. The flesh pit actually cushioned their fall, and many survived, but they begin to slide down into an unreinforced fold of the pit. Rescue personnel then begin to rush the scene and discover that the performers a few hours later are being digested alive in a digestion sack. That is high up on the top 10 worst ways to die list, for sure. The rescuers then begin to rush and cut them out of this sack as they're shrieking and screaming. And then they try to use this experimental antacid spray because, they're covered in stomach acid, essentially. But instead of neutralizing these acids, they are flash calcified. So imagine first you fall several hundred feet into this flesh monster. You survive the fall, probably with a few things like broken bones and a concussion. Then you fall further and further and then begin to be digested for hours. You just slowly melt, and then you just get turned to stone. Brutal. What's even more brutal is that they just leave this calcified mass of bodies in the park to serve as a landmark, to remind people to follow safety procedures, and they call it the circus clown chimus. But Anodyne thought that when life gives you a terrifying melted clown statue, make lemonade. And they use this opportunity to convince Jackson to go into partnership with them to avoid liabilities, which is really pretty smart when you think about it, because that's going to allow Jackson to really focus on the things he cares about, which is exploration of the pit. And, the money aspect of it can be handled by Anodyne. But now Anodyne has a real power over the decisions involving the pit. My personal theory, and this isn't written anywhere in the RPG or the website or anything like that, is that Anodyne started to realize some of these possible commercial applications of these exotic materials, and resources from the flesh pit, and cause a publicity stunt purposefully so that they could force Jackson's hand into this partnership. Which, it sounds like your typical evil corporation. Makes for a good story anyways. But anyways, the early days of the park really subsisted off this being a roadside oddity, with Anodyne payrolled scientists researching or searching for promising commercial opportunities with the resources found in the flesh pit. The flesh pit did start to gain recognition worldwide, which, let's be honest, of course it's going to get a lot of recognition worldwide. But it started to garner interest from other foreign governments, namely, in this instance, the Soviet Union. In the 1970s, the Cold War between the U.S. and the USSR was still going on. We still have proxy wars like Vietnam and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. But, both the governments were at least willing to talk to each other at that time. And, they started doing little projects to ease the tension. One such project in the World of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park would become Project Freefall. The project was to be a survey of the PBSO to be conducted as a partnership between the U.S. Department of the Interior and the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The overall goal was to lower a human to the lowest recorded depths of the superorganism with these objectives. 1. Map a precise determination of the anatomical structure throughout a vertical section of the Permian Basin superorganism. 2. Obtain bioseismic measurements from a deeper reference depth than any prior measurements. 3. Document distribution and diversity of parasitic fauna at both charted and uncharted depths. 4. Observe engineering tests of equipment at great anatomical depths. 5. Conduct a geobiological study of the exotic anatomy environment located in the deepest known extents of the superorganism. And finally, 6. Determine the effects of occult venereal phenomena on human health and psychology. Yeah, that's right, occult. Mystery Flesh Pit gets weirder. Just you wait. The expedition would be a joint effort comprised of three Soviets and 3 Americans. Dr. Kazimir Vinogradov, Chief of Geophysical Research for the Soviet Academy of Sciences, Colonel Nikolai Morozov, serving as a field engineer and security. Then there's Lieutenant Valeria Krishenko, former aspiring pilot and diver, who would be testing the experimental descent vehicle. Jim Jackson, of course, this guy is going to want to go, no surprises there. Gualtiero Ortiz, associate of Jim Jackson, responsible for much of the early equipment and navigation of the PBSO. And finally, Rachel Frost, the animal rights activist from years earlier, who became chief of venereal research at the University of Texas. It looks like maybe Jim Jackson has a bit of a sweet spot for her, because she's still very outspoken about these human activities involving the PBSO, but Jackson got her a spot on the expedition anyways. It's interesting, though, because it seems that maybe that first journey into the PBSO years ago caused her to become obsessed with it and become one of the early experts in these new fields of study developing around the flesh pit. Which, in hindsight, after reading through all this stuff over and over again, it's a little foreshadowing for what comes later with people just kind of becoming obsessed with the pit, much how like Frost and Jackson are obsessed with it. On October 12th, 1979, the expedition began with the experimental coronet vehicle lowered into the flesh pit. Over the course of 2 weeks, the expedition makes a vertical descent, cataloging samples and performing surveys as they go, and on day 12, they reach a depth of 10 kilometers or a little over 6 miles in freedom units. Which, let's just pause for a second. This thing goes 6 miles down, and they haven't even reached the bottom. Far from it, actually. That's how massive this thing is. On day 27, they breach what is called the mesogliatic firmament chasm and prepare an advanced base camp. They spend 5 days blasting through a particularly tough plate at the bottom of this chasm, and then they begin at lowering a smaller excursion pod vehicle into the cut, piloted by Lieutenant Valeria Krishenko alone. After 4 hours, they reach an unknown area of the anatomy of the PBSO, and communication between base camp and the excursion pod starts to experience interference. Lieutenant Krishenko tries to send this incomplete transmission. Light, reflective, and mixing. Tessellation, movement of coarse tissue, prismatic, behavior, becomes like a fractal. I will continue to collect a sample of the material. After 5 minutes, the excursion pod begins its ascent back to base camp, but is unable to contact base camp during its ascent. At 4:51 in the morning, base camp notices that something is pulling on the excursion pod. An alarm signal is recorded within the excursion pod. At 6:02, the vehicle surfaces intact, except that the canopy glass has been shattered inward, with Lieutenant Krishenko missing, with trace amounts of human blood on the shattered glass. Without a capable descent pod, they determined that searching for Lieutenant Krishenko is impossible, and they presume her dead. A single photo is recovered from the vehicle's imaging system moments before the drag on the pod was recorded. They presume this unclassified organism to be responsible for her death. The remaining crew of the Coronet then decide to abandon the remainder of their survey and begin the 22-day ascent, arriving at the lower base camp facility December 6th, 1979. Obviously, this amplifies the horror of the setting, you know, being Miles in the literal belly of the beast, and a crew member being abducted by, well, you know, whatever this thing is, but also expands on the mystery of it all. This previously unexplored area is vastly different than other sections of the PBSO. What biological purpose does it serve? What else dwells in it? I have no idea, because it's never really brought up again. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just one of those mysteries of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. And it's not the last one. There's actually several mysteries that are really never explained in either the blog or the RPG. But because of the death of Lieutenant Krashenko and the expense of the expedition, the Soviet Academy of Sciences decided to discontinue any future studies of the Mystery Flesh Pit. But the expedition is still considered a success, and this expedition is then used to justify the funding to declare the site a national park. Anodyne is also able to work out a deal to retain exclusive mineral rights to the pit, and they also are named the caretakers of the park because of their expertise dealing with it so far. This federal funding allows Mystery Flesh Pit to become a national park and enter what is considered the golden age for Mystery Flesh Pit. Just a few months after the expedition, on April 17th, 1980, President Jimmy Carter signs the annexation papers declaring the Mystery Flesh Pit a national park, with officials of the U.S. Department of the Interior and Anodyne. From here, we see the transition of the Flesh Pit transform from a tacky cowboy-themed roadside attraction into a major destination boasting world-class amenities with incredible advancements in technology used to both explore and exploit the Flesh Pit, which leads to world-changing products and tech from the resources gathered from within it. So let's start with what's considered the crowning jewel of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, the Lower Visitor Center. Your adventure into the wonder and magnificence of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park begins as your enclosed gondola begins to descend down into the darkness away from the blistering heat and light of the Permian Basin. Just when the 20-minute twisting and turning ride down into the maw of this immense organism feels like it might never end, an illuminated structure comes into view beneath your feet. Step out of the elevator car and into the well-lit and comfortable lobby of the Lower Visitor Center, your gateway to an unforgettable visit to one of the world's most unique natural wonders. The Lower Visitor Center is considered an architectural wonder because not only is it a massive structure suspended over a chasm that is essentially the stomach of this creature, and inside a living organism, it has to be constructed of materials that can handle that, like surgical grade stainless steel and acid resistant glass. Not really common materials you see used for anything else. It also it serves as a command center for both Anodyne employees as well as park rangers, as well as just being this starting point for visitors looking to see the sights and trails within the Flesh Pit, and has everything from equipment rentals to a Burger King, because you can't start your hike through the flesh of a sleeping god before you've had your Junior Whopper. So what kinds of sights and experiences are available to visitors of the park? Let's start with a fun one. Spasm fits. On occasion, lucky park visitors may observe a natural phenomenon as fascinating as the Flesh Pit itself. In what scientists think to be an immune response to continued dilation, the pit entry orifice begins to violently choke and spasm against retaining braces. The impressive display of vigor, which may last as long as 20 minutes, often features otherworldly tectonic carnal moans from deep within the Mystery Flesh Pit, which can be heard for miles in all directions. You can view this exciting spectacle from the outdoor amphitheater near the gondola pavilion. These choking fits usually occur following extensive engineering improvements within the pit. Natural phenomena. Ain't no way I would ever stick around for something like that for 20 minutes. I would absolutely nope out of there as fast as I could, but in the world of Mystery Flesh Pit, it's as normal as watching Old Faithful at Yellowstone. I mean, yeah, Old Faithful sits on a mega volcano that people are constantly prophesying is going to end the world as we know it, but, you know, it hasn't happened yet. Same deal here. Yeah, the choking is coming from this gargantuan sleeping monstrosity because we keep jamming it full of steel and concrete and walking around in its gullet, but it hasn't swallowed anyone yet. I cue some foreshadowing here. But that's what really is appealing about Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. The premise of this thing is horrifying, but in this world, it's commodified and made into this normal feature of the world. It's a level of horror satire that's just not really common, I feel. Also, there's this note on the brochure that says, due to gastric ejecta from the pit entry orifice, eye protection is recommended when directly viewing a spasm fit. Kind of gives me SeaWorld vibes or something like that. You know, don't sit on the front row if you don't want to be splashed with eldritch vomit. Gross. Another feature of the park would be the historic ritual grounds. Archaeological research on the ground above Mystery Flesh Pit uncovered the remains of an ancient ritual site, believed to have been utilized by indigenous cultures to perhaps communicate with the Mystery Flesh Pit. Sadly, much of these ruins were destroyed by construction activity when the park was first discovered, and what little remains of the site offers no clues pertaining to the pit or activities which transpired there. Today, the ritual grounds have a picnic area with tables, grills, drinking water, and restrooms. So we will kind of loop back around to the ritual grounds later, but I did just want to touch on it a bit. It definitely works to expand that mystery of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park because it offers some proof that ancient cultures were indeed interacting with the Flesh Pit before its modern day rediscovery. But we aren't really given any clues on what that interaction actually looks like. Obviously, we can probably infer that it was mostly or most likely treated as a deity or maybe a gateway to another world, and maybe, just maybe, they were sacrificing things to it to appease its unknowing will and hunger. But there's nothing here to say that. But my thoughts on this lead me to believe that there was indeed more there, but it was removed by Anodyne to purposefully obscure what ritual was there and why these ancient cultures performed it. I don't want to get too much into it this early in the video, but it will make sense when we talk a bit more about Anodyne and the 2007 tragedy that comes later. But we haven't even talked about the most popular activities people take part in while visiting a national park. Hiking. The park offers a few well-marked trails, such as the Bowels of the Earth route, a nearly 8-mile self-guided trail taking hikers to features such as Thor's Ribcage, Septum Falls, God's Mistake, and Oyster's Shame. Thor's Ribcage and Septum's Falls fall into what I would call would you just look at a category, essentially just being a section of the anatomy that looks like big ribs and a waterfall. And Oyster's Shame is just a landmark to remind people about conservation efforts and that it's important, because it's just an area that was stripped clean of a PBSO resource. But are you curious as to what God's Mistake is? Well, before the RPG book, there was pretty much no information on it at all. Like, how can you make a landmark called God's Mistake and give us 0 clues on it whatsoever? Well, there's a section in the RPG book that gives descriptions of these locations so that anyone wanting to use it in their campaign would have something to go off of. And, well, I'll just read it for you. While carrying one of the most evocative names of any pit feature, you don't say. God's Mistake is nonetheless an organic system. Liquid ballast is produced in the amniotic thermal springs and presumably other ballast bowl clusters and flows downward through a duct into a nearby mass of tissue. Early explorers cut into this organ and found that the amniotic fluid poured across hundreds of slender sacs arranged in horizontal rows in a way that superficially resembled fins or gills. On opening some of the sacs, explorers found a living animal in each: cattle, sheep, coyotes, birds, and other surface wildlife, highly emaciated and lacking hair or feathers, connected to the walls of the sac by fibrous veins and tissue bundles which grew into their flesh. Bacteriologists conjecture these animals fell into the entry orifice at some time and, instead of being digested, were redirected to this organ. Once the animals are fully enveloped by tissue and connected into the PBSO via the umbilical growths, it is theorized that the biochemical reaction of the animals with the ballast provides biological feedback the PBSO uses to adjust the chemical balance of the ballast. Officially, no human has ever been found in one of these fin-like sacs. Wouldn't you just love to hike to some place like that? Now on your left, folks, you'll see God's Mistake, where the Permian Basin superorganism likes to keep some of the surface wildlife from the West Texas desert that it decides not to eat in these flesh sacks filled with the stuff we use in our luxury spas. Please, no questions. It's just so weird and brings up a lot of horrifying questions, and there's some allusions to what it's for, kinda. You know, the endocrine stuff I don't really truly believe, but, you know, we'll circle back around to it later. Another route for visitors with spelunking and diving experience would be the Guts and Giddy Up route. That includes sites such as a prehistoric whale carcass, the Fondue Village, a desiccated copepod nest. Don't worry, we'll talk about those soon. And of course, the circus clown Chimus, the melted clown statue from towards the beginning of the video. Also, there's a funny note on this brochure I want to point out. Rangers are available throughout the marked trails to help you with information, first aid, and coping mechanisms. Because, of course, you're going to need a park ranger to help you cope with the fact that you're hiking in the guts of a giant monster. But these are just the marked trails. The cream of the crop for hiking would be the southern bronchial forest. So bronchial meaning one of the lungs of the pit. Take in the cool air as it rushes around you. Breathe in living history of hundreds of millions of years of natural evolution and adaptation. The southern bronchial forest, like all bronchial forests within Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, are enormous respiratory organs that fulfill a variety of roles in the highly complex and interdependent ecosystem of the Permian Basin superorganism. Each year, millions of tons of gases such as carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nitrogen are exchanged with these colossal organs in slow breaths. These long breaths fluctuate with the changing of the seasons. It takes about 6 months for just one of these lungs to fully inhale or exhale. During the inhalation process, cool air slowly inflates the many thousands of bronchioles within the forest. This provides the Permian Basin superorganism with oxygen and a large volume of relatively cold winter air. Conversely, during the warmer summer months, a slow exhalation process disperses buildups of carbon dioxide and waste heat. The thermal exchange of waste heat into the outer atmosphere is a vital way in which the Mystery Flesh Pit is able to maintain its metabolic processes. This thing is so massive that it takes literal months just to take one breath. Also, the heartbeat is very similarly takes a long time. This phenomena is known as red seismics and is listed in the RPG as taking as long as 20 minutes, and in certain parts of the PBSO can cause physical discomfort. I mean, everything about the Mystery Flesh Pit causes me discomfort, but yeah, I can imagine a heartbeat so loud that it causes you physical discomfort would be high up on the list of no thank yous. An interesting note about red seismics, though, is that apparently people who are exposed to it for a long period of time eventually become comforted by it. That's not weird or foreshadowing anything at all. Anyways, back to the bronchial forest. It does have a few trails that they have left undeveloped and represent a more naturalistic experience. And due to the introduction of cool air, this part can be experienced comfortably without a lot of protective gear, or at least during the winter inhalation period. During the summer exhalation period, however, the trails are actually closed off due to excess heat, buildup of carbon dioxide gases, which, you know, it causes asphyxiation, death. You know, we can't breathe it out. And the wildlife also becomes more aggressive. And we're about to get into the wildlife, so let me, you know, tell you that their normal behavior is already freaky enough, so I don't want to really know what aggressive behavior actually entails. So hiking is cool and all, but if you lived in the world of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, there is another attraction that has much more notoriety that people from around the world come to see. The Amniotic Thermal Springs, or as it was referenced in the older days before the park, the Pleasure Domes. Located deep in the warmer crypts of the Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, the Amniotic Thermal Springs are renowned worldwide for their delightful effects on mind, body, and spirit. First discovered during the early exploration of the Mystery Flesh Pit in the 1970s, the amniotic thermal baths were one of the earliest draws to the park. Many people traveled across the country to seek out the mystic properties of the healing baths, which were rumored to heal ailments and cure disease. Many others, calling them pleasure domes, enjoyed the aphrodisiac effects of the amniotic fluids. Today, this tradition continues for modern bathers who use the springs medicinally or recreationally. So it's essentially the fountain of youth with the bonus of making you want to get your freak on. The use of the term amniotic fluid is a bit of a misnomer because amniotic fluid is what surrounds a baby in utero. And apparently this stuff doesn't have those same qualities. But this is also the same stuff that surrounds all the captured mammals at God's mistake. So it definitely makes a parallel to it. But the difference is instead of creating new life, it's sustaining and rejuvenating existing life for people who bathe in it or consume it. But I bet anything held at God mistake is probably fueling some sort of metamorphic process, if I had to take a guess. Obviously, this amniotic ballast is incredibly valuable, and it's one of the major resources being collected from the PBSO, being used for ointments and creams and other products like the Feel Good McFlurry and Coca-Cola Heartthrob. There is a really funny mention of Coca-Cola Heartthrob in the character creation portion of the RPG under the background role chart for the security agent class, sorry. You and a good friend get together weekly to hang and drink rum and Heartthrob colas. The next day, you never talk about whatever you two did the night before. Nothing wrong with throwing back a few Coke Heartthrobs with the boys, right? So anyone coming to see the baths would have several bath options to choose from, like the main bath being kind of the run-of-the-mill bath that like anyone of all ages can use, all the way down to what is called the libido bath, where the potency of the amniotic ballast is at full blast. Kind of on the nose, but at least you kind of really can't wander into the libido bath and, not expect it to be a normal experience. The brochure for the baths also has this nifty potency guide for all the different baths, with a section that suggests that you see a physician before entering anything placebo bath down. If I had to guess, they probably had a problem with old horned dogs with weak hearts trying to get a little strange in some of the higher potency baths, and their hearts just giving out. The last two baths, the Verubius and Libido bath, however, have an additional recommendation to consult a religious, mystic, or sexual wellness counselor before entering. So I'm not going to really say much about that because I'm sure your own imagination can probably fill in the gaps to what those kinds of things go down in those baths. Also, the libido bath is so potent it has to have a conduct and consent form. Just gonna move on now. I think you get the gist of it. Alright, so hiking and nature is great and all, but what if you want a more luxurious experience while visiting Mystery Flesh Pit National Park? Well, the Interpark Wellness Resort is probably for you. A 210-room resort inside the Mystery Flesh Pit with a view of the Gastric Sea, sporting a variety of dining options, entertainment, and shopping. But the piece de resistance would be the thermal spa. And of course that means more amniotic ballast, because people can't get enough of this stuff. Held in a lightly structured environment and surrounded by the unique Neolithic aesthetic of the original surface ritual sites, guests may achieve new levels of psychosexual and neurocognitive enrichment. Along the way, you engage in personal exploration through guided sessions with our total wellness staff of mystical science practitioners and karma technicians with tantric attendees available as needed. Major transformations generally require ongoing work, often with a trained professional. After your archaeochemical journey, you may wish to meet with a therapist or counselor to integrate what changes may have occurred mentally, physically, and spiritually into your daily life. So these treatments are so transformative that clientele require therapy to figure out what the heck just happened to them. There's kind of a lot to digest here, but it really illuminates quite a bit about some of the experimenting Anodyne was performing on people, not to mention the inclusion of the ancient ritual site stuff. But again, we'll have to back around to this later. This resort, however, represents the final straw for Jim Jackson and his relationship with Anodyne. Gentlemen, what the hell is this? When you all sought out my expertise for the little VIP lodge, I expressed my concerns plainly, but I was otherwise supportive. Against my suggestion, you had your architect draft a larger plan, and I gave you some appropriate pushback. I was of the understanding that our prior agreements about the scale of your small lodge were final, or at the very least, I would be included on any changes to this whole enterprise. So, gentlemen, imagine my surprise when I find out earlier today that you've greenlit construction of a 210-room resort. This decision is wholly opposed to every conservation effort that the company has agreed to, and I'm amazed that the Park Service is allowing this. Since you all seem bent on going about business regardless of my advice, I see no reason for me to remain on this board, so consider this my formal resignation. James Jackson. I can imagine the relationship that Jackson had with Anodyne probably started out earnestly. Jackson was just a surveyor when he found the flesh pit. He didn't have the resources to really wholly explore this new biome to its fullest, and with something so groundbreaking as this, he had to have a partner of sorts to make it work. So it starts with saying things like, oh, this is just a mineral survey to keep the accountants happy, or we have to make some kind of money from it to keep the operation going. Don't you want to keep exploring? A few trinkets and sideshows won't hurt. So, for years, Jackson probably felt like he had a say when it came to this operation and how things went, but it's likely that after Anodyne had established their operations and found all these commercial applications using the resources from the pit, they no longer needed the expertise of a washed-up cowboy with a dream. They also had discovered some paranormal mutations that we will get to, that they probably considered sensitive information that couldn't be entrusted to an idealistic explorer. From here, however, Jackson exits our story and the lore, and there's not really any details except that he started a non-profit organization, the Jackson Foundation, and that he died in a drunk driving accident in 2006. All right, so we've gone through most of the history of the park, at least the 70s, 80s, and 90s up through to 2007. But now I think it's time to look at the wildlife that call the Flesh Pit its home. Everything that stays inside the Permian Basin superorganism for a length of time is changed, at least temporarily. But there are other mundane life forms that found permanent environmental niches as intrepid life forms, altering them to unrecognizable degrees. Things that make their home here see the natural world as alien, and visitors from the surface as potential invaders, if not prey. Not every creature is inherently hostile, but many are skittish. Others are unnervingly curious. Many are hungry. Every national park has some assortment of wildlife, whether that's birds, bears, deer, or wolves. And Mystery Flesh Pit National Park has these as well, at least on the surface of the park. But once you start to delve into the flesh pit, that's where you're kind of transported to another world with wildlife just as alien as the pit itself. What is interesting is that in many of these cases, these creatures mirror life found elsewhere in the world, but with some slight adaptations that allow it to thrive in the pit, like gigantism. Like, seriously, some of these things are terrifyingly huge. So let's take a look at some of the examples in the bestiary of the RPG, starting with the most common wildlife park visitors would come across: macrobacteria. The most common group of parasitic life forms encountered in the PBSO are macrobacteria. With hundreds of subspecies, macrobacteria represent a wide variety of echinoderms that have adapted to living within the vegetarial environment, adopting behaviors and traits superficially similar to colonial microscopic organisms. Generally, macrobacteria are radially symmetrical and have cilia, tentacles, or other appendages and digestion or excretory organs on their underside. They generally range in size from a baseball to a beach ball, though rare ones can reach huge sizes. Macrobacteria are a very diverse group of enterial parasitic life. Some larger species engage in lone hunting behavior, while other groups exhibit complex social behavior in organized colonies. Macrobacteria are not typically aggressive, but may be territorial if they feel threatened. Certain macrobacteria varieties secrete a caustic mucus that is capable of dissolving organic and synthetic materials and tissues. Most macrobacteria reproduce asexually and can regenerate tissue, organs, and limbs. In some cases, they can undergo complete regeneration from a single limb. As one of the earliest non-pit life forms that successfully adapted to life within the harsh environment of the PBSO, their abundance has made them an integral part of the ventarial parasite ecosystem. Almost every other species within the PBSO relies on macrobacteria either through direct consumption or as a food source for intermediate prey. So with macrobacteria, you can see what I mean by gigantism. It's just a bacteria as large as a basketball, which I don't know how many billion times larger that really makes it, but that's huge in comparison. And though it's alien and weird, macrobacteria aren't really that creepy per se. You know, yeah, they can hurt you, but so does swimming in boiling acidic hot springs at Yellowstone, which apparently is somewhat of a problem, which is kind of horrifying. Macrobacteria aren't the only docile-ish wildlife in the pit, though. Though commonly considered a nuisance, the mesoglial tridecapod is a fascinating creature that plays a critical role within the PBSO by filtering harmful blood-based parasites from the circulatory system of the entity. Tridecapods are so named because of their 13 legs, 12 of which are used for locomotion, with a 13th modified leg plated in durable keratinous segments that serve as a head. These quasi-vertebrates pose no threat to humans, as despite their fearsome appearance, they are non-venomous and passive, tending to congregate around high-voltage areas connecting the park to mining infrastructure. This is a side effect of the way they use electrical currents to direct them towards arterial food sources and their breeding pits. So again, another very alien-looking but otherwise benign example of wildlife that is in the flesh pit. If every example of wildlife was some terrifying monstrosity that swallows people whole, then the setting wouldn't have this grounded feel to it. It's just another example of thoughtful world building. It's not a menagerie of monsters per se, but rather an ecosystem of predators and prey and everything in between. There is a brochure about the tridecapod giving a lot more details, and it expounds a bit on why it's considered a nuisance. Apparently, it hunts for these blood vessels by sensing electrical currents, but because of that, they often mistake electrical conduit for blood vessels, which causes them to be electrocuted and for park and mining infrastructure to experience a power outage. Kind of like the equivalent of a raccoon knocking over your trash cans, but, you know, with a bit more stakes. So these are cool, but let's move on to something a bit more terrifying. The abyssal copepod is a fascinating creature that is rarely encountered. As their name suggests, they tend to avoid lights, machinery, and other human activity, preferring to reside in the deeper biostrata of the mystery flesh pit. As one of the higher order predators, abyssal copepods are skilled hunters. Their modified forelimbs, which eerily resemble human hands, allow them to grasp and kill almost any prey they encounter. Their carapace is coated in a waxy secretion that provides surprising protection from firearms and electrical discharges. The abyssal copepod never stops growing, and some have been estimated to be 250 years old. Alright, so this is some appropriate nightmare fuel, and this is the same creature that Jim Jackson wrote about and illustrated in one of those letters to Colton, I think at the very top of the video. Again, another form of gigantism. Copepods are a part of the crustacean family, but are typically, much smaller, and there are actually multiple species of copepod in the flesh pit, including common copepods, copepod, common copepods as they're called, and osteopathic copepods. Abyssal copepods having human-like hands is so creepy to me, and it leads me to some personal theories that maybe I can get into, but I just don't think they naturally evolved with these hands on their own. But so abyssal copepods represent the terrifying predator, but what about something cute that turns horrifying fast? The adult life of a gasp owl is short but painful. Like cicadas, gasp owls hatch from eggs but spend their first 7 years as a soft larvae within a protected sac. During this gestational period, the owl subsists on nutrients generated in pseudo-amniotic substance similar to a yolk. While this slow trickle of nutrients results in gaunt anatomy and a long growth period produced by the yolk organ, at full maturity, the long dream ends when adult gasp owls violently rupture their soft cocoons and spill out into the raw ventral environment. The complete adult life of a gasp owl lasts scarcely more than 10 minutes. Using a combination of grunts and pheromones, gasp owls engage in a panic mating ritual in their few minutes of adult life. Following copulation, the females consume the nutrient-rich craniums of their male partners. These calories enable the female to immediately lay a small brood of fertilized eggs within a flesh crevice before they themselves die of exhaustion, starting the cycle again. People are occasionally caught in the middle of one of these sudden, overwhelming frenzies. So this is mentioned in different parts throughout like the RPG book, but apparently this mating ritual is so traumatizing that people have to go to therapy to cope with what they witnessed. What's funny is that the gasp owl looks kind of cute in a weird horrific kind of way, but I guess that really just contrasts with how brutal this mating ritual is. I like it though because it's not necessarily this dangerous threat like the abyssal copepod, but it's still terrifying. It's like a mockery of nature. This creature endures 7 years of this ecstasy in a cocoon to be violently thrust into this bizarre ritual fueled by fear and hormones, only to die minutes later before seeding the next generation for it to all happen again. Like, what purpose does that serve in the ecosystem? I don't know, but it's creepy. But there is one thing that Mystery Flesh Pit National Park that takes the cake when it comes to creepy. Intrapit wildlife occasionally venture out of the pit to drag back surface animals such as deer, livestock, coyotes, and rabbits. If not eaten immediately, these animals sometimes undergo a fascinating phenomenon known as anatomic amalgamation. This process, not fully understood by venteriologists, results in a compound organism that is a living hybrid of multiple surface animals. No two of these amalgamations are the same. Variations derive from the amalgamations of different surface and intrapit creatures, but there are also other physiological features, such as a partial fusing of other body parts or the relocation of internal organs to exterior locations. Because of the gruesome and seemingly haphazard nature of these combinations, many compound organisms do not live beyond a few hours or days. Visitors and staff encountering a compound organism that is still alive are encouraged not to feed or otherwise engage in any activity which could prolong the suffering of the unfortunate entities. It gets worse. Compound humans are pitiful souls who have been lost in the PBSO, sometimes for months or even years. Their constant exposure to fluids and bizarre substances of the PBSO, probably with little or no protection, mutates them genetically, physiologically, and perhaps even chronologically. For compounds, there is danger in numbers. Survivors who get too close to one another can find themselves merged suddenly by their environment at odd angles and at different levels of integration. Okay, so not only do you have to worry about giant man-eating Larry the Lobsters, but there's also amalgamations that can include humans that resemble the alien from John Carpenter's The Thing. I mean, not only just wandering into one, but the possibility of becoming one yourself. Because apparently it can just happen. That's horrifying. But it gets worse. Anodyne found some of these human amalgamations and were able to identify the different humans in it, and were actually able to remove brains and brainstems and spines, placing them in jars filled with a nutrient salve, and hooked them up to computers so that they could save them. My first vocoder speech line, if I was hooked up to one of those machines as a floating brain in a jar, would be, unhook me, bro. Just end it. There are obviously other examples of wildlife like giant centipedes called gigantopedes and bird-like insects, but I'm going to leave those as surprises for people that want to check out the stuff in the RPG on their own. But before we move on and talk a bit about Anodyne, there is one creature rumored to haunt the innards of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. Strange lights, unexplained shadows of figures that vanish, echoes of rituals chanting in the deep. Each of these phenomena have been reported through the history of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. Named the Marafolk by early park explorers, it was thought that the figures seen in these ghost-like illuminations might be an undiscovered parasitic organism native to the Venterial environment. However, even after decades of searching, no conclusive evidence of the existence of any figures matching the description of these mysterious entities has emerged. A common theory is that the Marafolk are an optical illusion related to other tridimensional phenomena exhibited by cryptocairn behavior. Despite the momentum of this theory, science still has no credible answers for the chanting voices. So they can come up with a pseudo-scientific explanation to describe the lights and figures as just hallucinations. But nope, the chanting is real. Don't know what that's all about. Also, these guys really don't show up much anymore. It's just another one of those weird mysteries of the pit that just kind of feel nightmare fuel and leave you wondering, like, what is all this about? The Mystery Flesh Pit National Park is just filled with stuff like this. But anyways, I think it's time to take a look at the company Anodyne and the biotechnological future they were building. Anodyne's roots go back to Anchor Mineral Company, founded in 1923, and an eventual merger with a company called Dynamic Equipment LLC in the 1950s to become Anodyne Deep Earth Mining, where they became simply Anodyne after commercializing the resources from the PBSO. At its peak before the 2007 disaster, they were the 23rd largest American company, employing over 28,000 people, pioneering technology in several fields across the board. So far in this video, you've probably heard me use terms like bioseismic or venterial something or another. These are, of course, fictionalized terms utilized by the new fields of study that arose from the study of the PBSO and its own biological processes and how it interacts with the environment. There is venteriology, the broad study of the system, theory, and processes relating to the Permian Basin superorganism. Geobiology, a cross between venteriology and geology, and is the study of interactions between the biological processes of the Permian Basin superorganism and the geological process of the Earth. Venteriochemistry, ballast pharmacology, venterial conservation and ecology, the list goes on. All relating to the flesh pit with professionals largely employed by Anodyne and its partners. Anodyne, after discovering commercial applications for resources and research derived from the PBSO, had to engineer systems and technology to be able to exploit it for profit, like the MMP3 mobile mining platform, a 570-ton behemoth powered by two General Electric diesel engines that sported a price tag of over $300 million each, with only 7 ever being recorded built. This monstrosity of a rig allowed Anodyne a reliable method to traverse and scalp the interior of the PBSO for valuable resources. Of course, we've mentioned amniotic malice quite a bit already, but its applications include things such as medicine, beauty supplements, and even textiles, and it collects in large sacks like at the pleasure domes. But it has small sacks present virtually anywhere else in the flesh pit. Then there's blue tissue, which is an acidic, reactive blue gel that is very difficult to mine from the pit due to it being present at the deepest portions of the flesh pit. Remember Project Freefall and their record-breaking depth? That's where the blue tissue is. That's what they, the mesogliatical firmament chasm, that area, that what they had to break through and go through to get to the exotic anatomy. That's where the blue tissue is. Gastric fluid is the easiest to exploit resource and is used in cleaning products and industrial grade acids. Then there's black bone or oscurolite, a dark material in the bone structures of the pit with a strength to weight ratio of 50 times higher than titanium. Holy cow. And then there's corpusite or pearls, which are mineral formations with near perfect spherical geometry used in precision components and optical and measurement applications. Personnel of Anodyne and the Park Service would include, of course, park rangers, surveyors, miners, security, scientists, but the RPG includes a few new additions that, in conjunction with some paranormal discoveries about the plush pit that I'm going to get into shortly, illuminate much of Anodyne's goals and attitudes towards the public's really being allowed in the flesh pit in the first place. The first are marketeers. And at first, marketing for a national park and, of course, all the commercial products and services Anodyne provides sounds pretty normal. What's interesting, however, is their use of field marketers. The relationship between the public and the flesh pit balances on a wire. Between mass consumption and use of PBSO-derived products and the public's presence in the pit itself, things can go wrong, and we've seen plenty of horrible things that can happen to someone in the pit. Whether that's being hunted by an abyssal copepod, acid burns, or suffering amalgamation, the list of horrors is long. Any of these things could spark public distrust of the park or Anodyne products, should bad publicity spread over about the incident. So it's best to nip it in the bud from the start, from the very beginning. Enter the field marketer, who is on the spot as soon as something happens. You do know that the probability of an abyssal copepod attack is like 1 in 5 million, and 90% of the attacks are on off-trail encounters where safety measures are ignored. Did you ignore safety measures? Of course, acid burns. That's why we set up all these safety measures. It seems like maybe they were ignored. What do you think? Amalgamation is a baseless rumor. What you think you saw was a rare parasitic life form. Or you might be hallucinating. Are you coming down with a pit fever? You do seem awfully pale. They do this so any incident can have the facts spun for the best possible outcome on the spot, nipping it in the bud as soon as possible. The next class that is included is the person in black. Obviously, this is an homage to the urban legend of the men in black and serves as a somewhat similar purpose to that of a field marketer. But instead of putting a spin on the facts, the person in black are more interested in containment of information. The first tool in their arsenal would be a device known as the mental masher. It's a pulse-emitting device capable of scrubbing recent memories. Emphasis on recent memories, because the person in black will do whatever is necessary to contain the situation to either protect the public, the PBSO from bad actors, or most importantly, Anodyne's interest. Information regarding situations like that of human amalgamations or other tragedies cannot afford to leave the park. But another development has come that has top priorities for information containment. Qualities of the flesh pit have begun to manifest themselves in humans. Some of these manifestations are subtle, with no visible changes, such as the ability to drain energy from a living creature or being able to commune with the wildlife of the pit with limited use. But many of the other manifestations have very visible and horrifying qualities. Tentacles growing from the upper back, claws, fangs, and tiny cilia roots that crawl from the body. The list goes on. The direct cause for these manifestations are still poorly understood. Theories range from accidents regarding industrial mishaps, unintended side effects from PBSO-derived products, or direct contact from intrapit life forms. There also seems to be rumors that these manifestations can lay dormant until later generations, only coming to the surface in a child or grandchild. The need to understand this process, as well as amalgamation, which could be interpreted as a failed PBSO manifestation, drive Anodyne to perform illegal research into the process using unwilling victims who are otherwise normal people or perhaps unfortunate compound humans. The manifestations are new information present only in the RPG so far, and it presents a problem far different than tourists simply being eaten. It's evocative, with victims still maintaining a semblance of their humanity over compound humans. who are these monstrosities. And it also just has this allure to it, because if it's a process that can be understood, it can become profitable. So, of course, anything and everything to do with these manifestations are kept close to the chest, both before the 2007 disaster and afterwards. But now I think it's time to finally talk about the disaster that shut down the park, the 2007 disaster. At 10:29 a.m., July 4th. Unseasonably high rains forced park administrators to cancel a July 4th concert and fireworks display scheduled to take place on the surface park grounds. Many visitors who have already purchased tickets to the event become upset, and a decision is made to extend the park hours until midnight for those who had purchased event tickets. 8 p.m., normal closing time for the national park. A typical shift change of reduced night staff in the control room takes place. 9:16 p.m. Harvesting crews working in the western extremities of the organism set a new extraction record to meet a quota for bonuses in time for the holiday weekend. 9:30 p.m. Control room operators initiate a routine system self-test and discover a relay fault error resulting from increased electrical demand from mining equipment and tourist infrastructure. A control room operator logs the fault and notifies an on-duty engineer. 9:41 p.m. Water drainage from surface rain into the entry orifice begins to collect in the sand gullet. Drainage pumps are automatically activated by a sensor system but fail to initialize due to the relay fault. An emergency backup pump running on a separate emergency circuit is automatically activated. 9:42 p.m. A critical alarm in the control room alerts operators that the emergency water pump has seized and is inoperative. Under lubrication of the pump's impeller bushings resulted in corrosion due to the moist interior of the flesh pit environment. 9:48 p.m. Technicians arrive at the primary pump station to discover the sand gullet almost completely submerged. Water begins to pour over the dorsal respiratory ridge and into bronchial bulbules. Control room operator diverts power to hydraulic stent rams to brace for expected choke response. 9:51 p.m. Technicians repair the relay fault as control staff reset the park's electrical grid. The grid is offline for 45 seconds. The automatic PA system does not notify guests as the system is scheduled to automatically shut down at the normal 8 p.m. closing time. The temporary lapse of lighting caused many guests to become panicked and return to the main gantry lift at the lower visitor center. 9:52 p.m. A choking action from the organism begins 31 seconds into the electrical reset. The main dorsal trunk violently flexes. Lack of power to hydraulic arming rams caused irreparable damage to several sections of internal infrastructure. 9:53 p.m. As the electrical system finishes the reboot cycle, the dynamic hydraulic actuators supporting the lower visitor center overcorrect for stability, not accounting for the shift in wall lining of the nexial cavity in which the visitor center of the facility is anchored. 2 of the 6 structural supports are torn from their foundations, which cause the facility to list 20 degrees off vertical. The base joint of the vertical entry gantry is bent beyond its design limit angle. 9:54 p.m. The master alarm is tripped automatically. Surface facilities are notified as response teams are given the order to mobilize. 9:56 p.m. Park rangers are dispatched to rescue groups of visitors trapped in partially collapsed tunnels and trails. 10:03 p.m. Continued movement of the organism combined with rainwater causes one of the upper entry gantry supports to slip. An outbound elevator conducts an emergency stop, stranding over 24 visitors. 10:05 p.m. Tremors registered as far away as the DFW Metroplex. 10:06 p.m. Soil liquefaction destabilizes surface facilities in and around the organism. Dilation anchors begin retracting to keep the entry orifice open. 10:12 p.m. A master failsafe is activated by automated park management system. 20,000 liters of aconitine compound are injected into the superorganism via a distributed network of relay stations located throughout its known internal anatomy. Tremors and convulsions intensify as the entry gantry connection to the lower visitor center detaches completely. The lower visitor center begins to collapse downward into the nexial cavity. Peristaltic muscle action of the nexial cavity begins to exert a substantial pressure on the outer structure of the lower visitor center facility. 10:15 p.m. The prime labioid junction just west of the septum falls geobiological feature flexes into an open position, releasing a torrent of lactogastric chyma into the dorsal trunk. It is likely that this was a reaction to the aconitine injection. 10:16 p.m. Peristaltic spasm forced the caustic chyma slurry through the nexial cavity and up through the lower and upper moisture crops towards the surface orifice. Many guests attempting to flee the stalled elevator near the entry orifice attempt climbing out the upper moisture crop, but are ultimately unsuccessful due to torrential rains causing the surfaces to become very slippery. Many end up falling back into the maw. 10:17 p.m. The chyma slurry erupts from the surface orifice in a geyser several hundred meters in height. Large pieces of undigested organic matter crush several vehicles and damage windows. 10:19 p.m. Following the several-minute-long ejecta event, a deep and incredible loud roar erupts from the entry orifice as ground tremors intensify further. Large extremities begin surfacing through bedrock and soil approximately 30 kilometers to 120 kilometers from the entry orifice. 10:25 p.m. The acrid smell of the gastric ejecta can be detected as far as Odessa, Texas. 10:26 p.m. Two park service vehicles and a tour vehicle containing park service employees and several guests attempt to ascend through the entry orifice tube. 10:27 p.m. Peristaltic action crushes one of the tour vehicles and sucks the other two vehicles back into the nexial cavity and down into a digestive organ. These vehicles are presumed destroyed. 10:58 p.m. Pentagon is given authorization from the White House to use nuclear force if necessary to prevent the organism from entering an active and/or ambulatory state. 11:02 p.m. The on-site operations director within the lower visitor center control room initiates a final fail-safe measure in the form of the contingency measure. The master event log reports successful spin-up of the contingency measure. 11:05 p.m. Lower visitor center structural integrity is critically compromised, resulting in total collapse. Data connections with lower visitor center is severed. 11:13 p.m. Spasms and motor action of the superorganism begins to noticeably subside. Response teams begin to descend into the surface orifice to attempt rescue operations. 11:19 p.m. Response team encounters visitor group which had attempted escape from stalled elevator. Most are dead, the remainder are mortally wounded and partially digested due to caustic gastric ejecta. 11:42 p.m. Radio contact established with Ranger vehicle trapped within Oyster Shame. Due to ventricle closure, no feasible rescue strategy can be developed before complete mastication occurs. 11:56 p.m. Response teams confirms that contingency measure and associated facility are still intact and operating. 11:58 p.m. Texas Governor Rick Perry formally declares a state of emergency for Gumption County. 12:22 a.m. Response teams route data power umbilical to new base camp in contingency measure facility. 12:35 a.m. 3 interpit lifeforms are identified as having been ejected onto the surface. 15 visitors are injured and 7 are hunted by interpit lifeforms during panicked evacuation of surface resort. 12:41 a.m. Park staff managed to kill the 3 large lifeforms. 1:02 a.m. National Guard helicopters begin delivering supplies and personnel to aid in site containment. 1:58 a.m. Field Hospital is constructed to care for wounded visitors and staff. 2:37 a.m. Initial damage survey report catastrophic destruction of internal park infrastructure. Pit geobiology has dramatically changed in hazard level. 3 a.m. Emergency teleconference of Anodyne executive leadership. National Parks Director and Secretary of Interior are present. 3:12 a.m.
Executive decision is made to initiate FEMA response and assemble a task force for containing superorganism. 4 a.m. Media, helicopters, and vehicles begin to report on the scope of the disaster. 4:39 a.m. Base camp technicians begin to spin down contingency measure. Large fractures due to internal stress have appeared on mineral components. Engineers advise against reinitializing contingency measure until mineral components can be replaced or repaired. 6:08 a.m. Ground personnel begin assembling a pump system to inject industrial sedatives into the superorganism. Transport trucks containing industrial sedative arrive. 9:45 a.m. Emergency teleconference of Anodyne shareholders. 11:20 a.m. Several injured visitors inexplicably leave field hospital and begin walking towards open pit orifice. Approximately 38 individuals are able to crawl back into the orifice over the course of 8 hours. None are recovered. 3:51 p.m. Radio transmissions from trapped ranger vehicles ceases. Many speculate that other small groups of visitors and staff are still trapped.
So it took record-setting rainfall combined with tourists staying after hours, miners busting tail to make quotas, and a faulty backup pump for this tragedy to occur. Essentially, it just choked on some water and it just woke itself up and got a little pissed. It didn't even really get up. It just wriggled around a little and resulted in over 750 fatalities, 1,800 major injuries, and over 18,000 people seeking medical attention or psychiatric help over the coming weeks, and of course, billions of dollars in damages. If it wasn't for the contingency measure, things would have been much worse. The contingency measure is hypothesized to function by utilizing a series of standing harmonic and ultrasonic wavelengths which have been observed to affect the overall behavior of the Permian Basin superorganism. These waves are created by applying the 15 megahertz mechanical percussion to the face of the excavated large quartz crystal, also known as mystic artifacts number 15, number 21, and number 22. Once struck, the unique properties of the relic propagate the wave outward and into the surrounding anatomy of the Permian Basin superorganism. When placed upon rapidly rotating turntables, the effect can be multiplied and orientated, allowing a high degree of theoretical influence over the organism. This contingency measure was activated only once and demonstrated the potential application this technology may have in future containment measures. However, at the time of this investigation, no additional relics have been located intact. Without this key assembly component, the CGR does not recommend additional experimental use of the contingency measure. I believe these mystic artifacts that are discussed or mentioned here were removed from the ancient ritual site we discussed earlier. Obviously, Anodyne knows much more than they are letting on when it comes to the mystical or paranormal qualities surrounding the mystery flesh pit. The problem they have now, though, is that the artifact's integrity has been compromised. It worked, but now they don't have a reliable backup other than drugging the PBSO with ungodly amounts of tranquilizers. The result of this tragedy led to multiple lawsuits levied towards Anodyne, which eventually led them to declaring it bankruptcy. However, due to their expertise in all fields concerning the Permian Basin superorganism, they were reorganized into a new company under the United States and renamed the Permian Basin Recovery and Superorganism Containment Corporation, where they continue to study the PBSO and work to ensure it stays asleep. Their current project is simply named the Reclamation Project, and rumor has it that they restarted mining operations. As a setting, whether it's for TV, books, or an RPG, Mystery Flesh Pit National Park is a vibe that I really haven't seen anywhere else. It's steeped in pseudosciences, mysticism, and satire, and its lore is deep and fascinating with gaps that keeps the mystery interesting. I don't believe that there needs to be an answer for all the lingering questions left, because especially with an RPG or cosmic horror, you need these gaps to create your own story or ponder on its themes. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try. There's a few questions with theories that I really want to propose. Where did the superorganism come from, and why has it been asleep for so long? And most importantly, what does it want, or does it even have wants? So answering where the PBSO comes from is really more of a when question first. So allow me to put on my paleontology hat, and let's look at some clues. So obviously the PBSO is old, really, really old. We have evidence of ancient remains of human-like hominids dated to 35,000 BC in the well of the abhumans, as well as prehistoric well carcass present within it. Also, the well of the abhumans is another one of those weird things. It's on the Tumblr page. You don't even have to buy the RPG to go look at it, but go and look at that little article. It's very interesting and fascinating. We aren't given an exact species for this prehistoric well, but let's look at the prehistoric George Acetus whale as an example. George whale fossils have been confirmed in the American South in states like Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, with some possibly yet to be confirmed fossils in Texas. Old George swam in the ancient seas over North America during the Eocene period, some 40 million years ago. Plenty of time for the PBSO to start its big nap and get covered in rock, which also brings up another clue. If the PBSO has a whale carcass in it, that must mean at some time it was aquatic. This is even theorized, I think, in one of the blog posts or the Q&As on the Tumblr page. It makes sense, though, well, because it kind of just resembles a big starfish. So we can possibly date the PBSO back to 40-ish million years old, and that it had an aquatic history, but I believe it's even older than that, by another 200 million years old. So the PBSO in its current sedated state has dangers that can be associated with it. But these are really more localized dangers and is much more containable. If you live around it, sure, but for the rest of the world, not so much. Should it wake up, however, it could possibly cause an extinction level event. If it were to get up and start moving, it would just destroy anything in its path. And remember, nukes don't really work on it. And a truckload of poison is just made it throw up a little. Its interior ecosystem is also likely to become much more agitated and start hunting on the exterior as well, which happens in its sedated state as is. But stuff like gigantopedes and abyssal copepods don't really have natural predators on the outside of this thing. Lastly, the PBSO has some sort of mind-altering capabilities as well that compel creatures, including humans, to it. We saw this happen with the survivors from the 2007 disaster, and the site currently has a sign warning people not to venture into the pit. Now, this phenomenon is not totally understood in the lore, but who knows how that would really manifest itself if it were to fully wake up. All in all, it waking up would be disastrous, and an extinction level event could be likely, much like the Permian Triassic extinction from over 250 million years ago. So the Earth has had plenty of extinction events over its lifetime. Everything from the Chicxulub asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs to large volcanic eruptions that formed things like the Siberian traps. These events are just really the catalyst for an extinction event. However, the real killer is usually global climate change, or the ocean becomes acidic or anoxic, and it kills a lot of the ocean life. So the PBSO, or the Permian Basin superorganism, is named that because it occupies an area in West Texas known as the Permian Basin. It's called the Permian Basin because it contains the largest sections of sedimentary rock from the Permian geologic period, and that's in the whole world. The Permian Basin is a place, though, not a time period. But it's not name association that leads me to believe that it comes from this Permian Triassic extinction event, but rather from the cause of that mass extinction itself.
So here's the thing. Out of the 5 major extinction events, the Permian-Triassic extinction event was the most severe, causing upwards of over 80% of all life to go extinct. At one point, it was estimated that 90 to 96% of all ocean life was just completely wiped out, which is absolutely nuts. Because of this, it's known as the Great Dying. It gets even weirder though. Out of all the extinction events, this one has the least consensus on what actually happened. There is some consensus. Most of it leads to like volcanic eruptions, but not quite like the other periods of mass extinction. There's typically clear things to show us what actually happened with those. So the PBSO possesses the capabilities to cause a mass extinction event and was once aquatic. So placing it during the Permian-Triassic extinction event that caused the largest extinction event in history, especially in regards to ocean life, makes sense. So that answers the when question. But now the question is how it came to be. Well, I don't know if we're actually going to know the how question, but I think we can answer the where question. This is a part of the Araguaia Dome, or crater in Brazil, the largest impact crater in South America. It is large, but not large enough to have the energy to cause an extinction event. Also, when this asteroid made impact, the area was still a shallow sea. So what's interesting about this? An asteroid that hit a shallow sea right at the beginning of the most mysterious extinction event in history? I think the PBSO came from space and just started assimilating life on Earth, like the Tyranids from Warhammer 40k or something like that. And those early assimilations influenced its overall aquatic design. So the next question, why has it been asleep for so long? Okay, so this is kind of a dual hypothesis. So it was able to exterminate a large majority of life on Earth, but not everything. What if it hits this state of critical mass where it has really reached the apex of its form, where it can become self-sustaining without having to consume a whole world's worth of food to survive? It seems kind of counterintuitive because typically the larger a creature is, the more calories it needs, but its own current caloric requirements aren't understood very well in the modern age of Mystery Flesh Pit. I mean, it's not really eating anything of any consequence. A few misplaced cows or tourists aren't what's sustaining it. So it's possible that maybe it hit this critical mass event and went into a state of hibernation, like a grizzly bear during winter. But for hundreds of thousands of years or something like that, even millions maybe. But we have several clues to suggest that it was lured to sleep instead where it lies. The contingency measure and its rare mineral artifacts were able to successfully put it to sleep during the 2007 disaster, and the presence of the ritual site at the Mystery Flesh Pit National Park gives me the impression that the site is there to keep the PBSO asleep indefinitely, rather than some sort of religious observance of it. And there is a story that gives this theory some credence. In the second Q&A of the Mystery Flesh Pit webpage or Tumblr, there is a now deleted question regarding Native American interactions with the Flesh Pit, and it can be found using the Wayback Machine. The favor of the Great Spirit rested on the abundant forest, flowers, songbirds, and small animals of these quiet hills. Then a fierce dragon devastated the land, bringing disease and hunger and hatred and greed on the people. The Indian nations pleaded with the Great Spirit to subdue the dragon into a deep slumber, and the might of all the heavenly forces contrived to bury it under the world where it shakes the earth even today. Once the Great Spirit had vanquished the dragon, he caused pure water to gush up through the earth from the beast, and asked that this favorite place be held neutral ground, so all can share in the healing waters. So if you replace healing waters with amniotic ballast and the dragon with a giant starfish, well, it sounds an awful lot like the Flesh Pit. So did ancient man figure out a more primitive solution to the contingency measure that allowed them to subdue the PBSO? I don't think so. I think we're dealing with ancient aliens. I believe that the Great Spirit in the story was an alien interceding to subdue the creature.
And I think I know how. Okay, so all of this was speculation, of course, but now we're getting into the real thick of it. So let's take a look at the contingency measure device, specifically the artifact used to subdue the PBSO. It describes the artifacts as large quartz crystals that are cracked, so using them further is, it's risky. Quartz crystals can be shaped to produce vibrations that help us accurately trap time. That's, it's what's in all your digital watches. But what's stopping them from reproducing the artifacts? Quartz can be manufactured, so I'm thinking that maybe it wasn't quartz vibrations that were the real source of the vibrations for the contingency measure, but something even more exotic. Let's go back and examine Project Freefall. There's a few things that I want to specifically point out here. When the expedition team reached the bottom, right before they went through the blue tissue layer, they had to do some serious blasting to get through. And when they reached the other side of the blue tissue, the environment was tessellating and fractal. The sample they retrieved has these same qualities. It's foreign and exotic, even by the same standards set by the things found in the flesh pit before. It's like it's something else entirely. And that's because I think it is. It's almost as if the PBSO is sitting on something even more alien than itself. All right, so follow me here. The actual top layer of the flesh pit is really, really dense, anywhere that isn't specifically around the orifice, like armor protecting it. And armor is usually always placed in areas that need it most. Think about modern tanks. The armor is always thickest on the front and the sides, but is quite thin on the bottom because the threats aren't typically coming from underneath. So I think in Project Freefall, they reached the bottom, and though the hide is thick, they're able to actually get through it. The blue tissue is really more of a gel as well, and it's incredibly acidic, and the people in the Mystery Flesh Pit universe who hold the patents using the material are incredibly secretive of it. This is something I saw in the RPG. It's almost like it's just a separating layer between the PBSO proper and whatever it's sitting on, possibly there to protect it. The environment beyond is described as fractals or fractalization, and fractals are present everywhere from nature to math. But this environment underneath the PBSO is just really weird and alien. But fractals also have a soothing nature to them. There's actually research that shows that looking at fractal patterns activates our frontal lobes to induce a sense of relaxation. So what if this exotic material could be manufactured in a way that allows the same, but instead of visual stimulus, it recreates an auditory stimulus that creates the same effect? So here is my crazy theory. Okay, an asteroid of this exotic material is launched at Earth in an effort to lure the PBSO to it, and then is lulled to sleep by its fractal vibrations. And every so often, a ritual of sorts or procedure is performed using artifacts of the same material to keep it in a sedated state. Crazy sounding, I know, but it sounds cool, right? The next question comes up though, and that is why? Why would an alien race even bother subduing this monstrosity? What's the purpose? And that brings me back to the PBSO and what it wants. The PBSO, for all we know, is a solitary creature. We haven't found another one, and it doesn't seem to have any reproductive organs or capabilities. It just showed up and started eating and growing. It's like that's its sole purpose and want. It's almost like it was just designed to do that. But if it was designed by an alien race, then what's the purpose? It doesn't really terraform anything. It seems like a poor bioweapon. I mean, there would definitely be better bioweapon designs. No, I don't think it's really a weapon or anything like that, but rather a factory. And this factory produces amniotic ballast. Just a weird alien Viagra factory. Or, well, it's probably used for the medicinal properties, but, Okay, so the mystery flesh pit being an alien entity that came from space and caused a Permian-Triassic extinction and was lulled to sleep by an alien race is something I think fits really well. And there's quite a bit of evidence that supports that theory. but the exotic fractal hellscape below it being a monster-sized dose of galactic melatonin. Well, it sounds fun, but who knows? I took several leaps in there to make that fit because I thought it sounded cool, and that's really the beauty of Mystery Flesh Pit National Park as it is. It's a multimedia project that just has some cool blog posts with cool art and lore and an RPG, but what is there is just so compelling and weird and mysterious. It's a setting that is ripe for stories of government subterfuge, cosmic horror, body horror, or like a disaster story. My headcanon for my theory is something that I would fit into one of my own RPG campaigns where a group of researchers are dealing with company secrets they aren't privy to and stumble across revelations that shake the core of their beliefs while they are fighting for their lives from creatures like abyssal copepods and trying to maintain their sanity while suspicion from men in black or persons in black are high and they are worried they're going to have their mind wiped or assassinated. There's just so many stories that you can like fit into the setting, and that's why I'm so fascinated by Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. All it needs to become a smashing success is for, and I don't say this like it's not already like a big success because it is, but I feel like it could be compelled to new heights if there was like this, if a story could be put to film like a mini series or like a movie or like a high effort video game. And that's not any shade on the indie games that have come out because they're great as they are, but like something like with some budget behind it. Honestly, I would love to see any of those things. But all in all, I think Mystery Flesh Pit National Park is just one of the coolest and weirdest pieces of world building I've ever come across. And I love it. And I think if you like cosmic horror or body horror or even just weird sci-fi stuff and you like the national park aesthetic, you should check it out because it's well worth your time. Alrighty then, folks. If you made it this far in the video, all I can say is thank you very much. I appreciate your time and I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, I'm leaving some links in the description to Mystery Flesh Pit's web store and the RPG, so if you like it, please support Mr. Roberts because I ain't got nothing to sell you yet. Also, that there's this 2007 disaster shirt. I think it's such a cool piece of merch. I mean, would you just look at it? That's sick. Look at that. It's so cool. I also really like the RPG. This isn't an RPG or D&D channel, but I do play, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. It uses the cipher system, so it's different than things like D&D, which is, if that's what you're used to, it's definitely different than that. But D&D is really more of a powerful player-centric system, and it just doesn't play well with horror, really. But everything is in there to help you learn it and apply the unique parts of Mystery Flesh Pit to it. And you just need one book. You don't need like 3 to 6, or anything like that. For returning viewers, thank you very much for your patience. I did not believe that this was going to take like 5 or 6 months to get this video out, but stuff came up, yada yada, you get it. Plus this is going to be like my biggest video yet, so yeah, it's taking a while. Also, we're over at like 7,000 subscribers now, and I'm still not really sure what to make of that. I'm both honored and perplexed, but all I can say is that thank you very much, and I hope you stick around for whatever weird videos come next. If you did like the video and you are feeling generous, please feel free to like and share, as that does all the video algorithm stuff. Do whatever you want. It'd be cool if you did. If you are new here and enjoyed the video, please check out some of my other videos. If you like these long style videos, breakdowns, explainers, stuff like that, I've done a video on the Analog Horror Series Local 58, which is probably more similar to like this video. I've also looked at Edgar Allan Poe's The Pit and the Pendulum, and even weird real life stuff like nuclear semiotics, and the conspiracy that goes along with it, which I did a poor job of really separating it as a, there's not really a conspiracy of nuclear semiotics. It's more like nuclear semiotics is really a product of the just nuclear power conspiracy. There's a conspiracy in there. Blah, 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 blah. I'm just like jabbering here, but that video took a long time to do too. A lot of research, a lot of reading, And I'm very proud of that one. And I just did not expect the rabbit hole to go down. I found this weird thing, and it was like, oh, wow, this is weird and crazy, and this is a real thing. I'm going to talk about that. Oh, there's a conspiracy. Wonderful. Anyways, I think that does it for me. Ciao for now.